Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining this Safety Roundtable session with myself and two very special guests. Got a great topic today, one that we have touched on before on the Safety Roundtable and on the podcast. But I think we can go into some more detail today because this is a topic that's always evolving and changing, and it's something that we need to keep abreast of everything that's happening at all times, I would suggest. So thanks for joining as we talk about what we've called the digital evolution of safety. So lots of you on the call, which is great to see. And there's people joining us on live streams and all sorts of other things as well. I'll do a very quick intro to my guests. So firstly, we've got Dan Hobbs, who is the CEO and founder of Protex AI. Dan is a expert in AI in terms of video, and he'll explain what he does in a minute, I'm sure. But really interesting, exciting business. And then we've also got Peter Thomas, who is a safety professional but has a keen interest in technology within safety and has recently launched his own podcast called I think it's called My Safety Tech Podcast, or I think that's the right title for it. So we've got two great experts to talk about this topic today, and as always on these sessions, they are interactive. So do fire in questions and comments into the chat. I'll be monitoring those as we go along. And there's also the opportunity, if you're joining us on Zoom, to go to reactions and raise your hand, and I can call you up and you can literally join in the conversation in person, for want of a better term, even though we're on Zoom. But you know what I mean, the difference between typing something in the chat and actually getting involved. So let's get started then. I think what would be good as a first point of call is just to kind of define what we mean by AI. So what types of AI are there? And if we're going to start talking about AI, are we talking just about generative text? Are we talking about other things, etc.? Dan, you and I attended an event before Christmas where we talked about this topic, and you gave a great explanation. So I wonder if you could start us off by giving us a bit of a definition of AI in this context.
Sure. Yeah, sounds good. And thanks for having me, Christian, and to meet everybody. But yeah, I think when people think of AI in general, maybe as a preconception to it, I think everyone jumps to ChatGPT when they think of AI and artificial intelligence, especially what's happened in the news over the last little while. I think a big thing though to understand is AI isn't just that. That's a thing called generative AI. So it's one type. So you can look at it from broad AI, which is everything and anything, and then narrow AI being each individual segment of what AI can be. So that can be anything from using sensors to the generative AI. So creating things. You might have seen people in the last few weeks. Where OpenAI just released, you could create videos on just totally self-generated through these systems, but also other things like computer vision, which is what we use. We use camera systems and AI around that. So there's a whole different type of different types of AI, but it depends what task you're trying to achieve. Depends on what type of AI you use in that regard.
Perfect. So we're going broad and wide, and there's loads and loads of use cases. And Pete, you've had some people on your podcast talking about this. I mean, anything you want to add for Dan's perspective there, or anything particularly around the safety area?
Yeah, Christian, I'm glad you asked Dan that question first. Rather than ask the safety professional, you might have got a very different answer. But yeah, certainly at the moment, in terms of health and safety, and in terms of the podcast, we've got the likes of what Dan does, but we're also seeing a lot of closed large language models. So as Dan said, large language model is similar to that ChatGPT, but we're seeing closed large language models. So these are it's effectively a language model that's been built by an organization. But they've specifically trained it on everything from the HSE, all of the documentation from OSHA, from EU OSHA. So it only knows health and safety. So when we look at large language models and you ask ChatGPT a question, it can answer on anything because it's taken the information from anything. Whereas the systems that I'm seeing in safety, they've only been trained on safety information. So if you were to ask it a question like, who's better, Keir Starmer or Richie Sunak, it wouldn't be able to answer that question and would just tell you I can't answer that question rather than make up an answer, if that makes sense.
Oh, that's a question and a half, isn't it? We'll definitely avoid answering that one today because yeah, we don't want to get involved in any of that stuff. So if you think about I think there's a range of, or what I'm seeing is a range of kind of opinions or philosophies, let's say, about it. You might go from somebody who is, and I'm towards this end, fully on board with it, wants to kind of ride the wave, embracing the potential benefits that can bring. And then at the far end, you've got kind of people that are quite skeptical about it. I'm sure I know the answer to this, but where do you guys sit on that? And what kind of advice would you give people philosophically as a way of thinking about AI and perhaps trying to overcome some of the potential sort of misconceptions or sort of blocking opinions that people might have? Do you want to go first on that, Dan?
Sure. Yeah. We've explored this a bunch, and I think for everybody on the round table today is probably why they're here. Is trying to understand what is AI and what will people do. For a bit of context, like if I was saying this, 14, 16 months ago, it would be entirely different. Where people are like, "What the fuck's AI?" They think of like the Terminator or something like, "Someone's going to take my job." That's the first thing people think about when they think of AI. But I think that's changed. I think people's conceptions that AI is a thing, and it's not just this movie things we see in the movies. But I think there still is that hesitancy getting into it, particularly in safety. And we only spoke about this before going live of people that are a bit hesitant going into it because in safety we have to be risk averse to it before we're 100% sure that it's going to work, or certainly 80% sure that something's going to happen from it. So I think a big part of it is, and for people to take that step into it is twofold. I think one's an education piece, so just having a look at what's out there, not just looking at ChatGPT, but what else is AI? What's involved in it? What is it? But two is looking at companies that use AI, like us or like other companies, and ask them. There's a bunch of resources out there, and I feel like the onus is on the technology companies to explain that to the users, being safety professionals. So I wouldn't say that it's an over reliance that you have to go and figure everything out yourself. There's a bunch of people out there like me and others in my team and other companies like us that are using AI for really, really cool purposes. But going and looking at what's out there, asking questions is the best thing, and getting transparency on that. Because once you know that, then you can know how you can bring it into your operations.
Yeah, that makes good sense. And I mean, you touched on the kind of AI is going to take your job fear that people have. How would you kind of define or categorize AI, in that perspective? Is it something that is going to be massively disruptive and change the whole world, or is it something that is a bit fun and at the other end of the spectrum, a bit fun and fluffy, and it's not really going to change anything? Or where does it sit on there, and how would you kind of explain it as a tool, a resource, or whatever you want to use in your words, Dan?
Yeah, that's a really, really great question, and I think that's something that is a big consideration when looking at AI in the first place. I think from the offset is AI is a tool. What AI does is it gathers and organizes data in much better ways than how we're doing it currently. So if you can imagine a safety professional's job now, is they go out and the first protocol is trying to figure out what the fuck's going on. Doing a site walk or trying to figure out different things like that. That's your first protocol. Once you have that, then you can make decisions and you can be impactful and you can change the way people work. That data collection piece and that understanding of what's going on can be hugely enhanced with AI. So seeing it as a tool of data collection, that's really where you should start your steps into AI, is saying, okay, well, what I want to do here is get more data. How do I get more data? I can't be everywhere at once. And I'm moving into that. I think a really important thing, like you said, on the other end is there can be a case where AI just becomes a sexy thing that you use maybe a system that you use once every month or once every 6 months. And it's kind of cool to have there and becomes a shiny thing. And that's a really, really important thing. There's going to be change management, whichever way you bring in AI into your system. But the really, really, really important thing to that is that it has to be involved in your current workflows. It can't sit separately to how you work. So we have clients that have us as a KPI in their like weekly stand-ups or daily stand-ups, where they have a PowerPoint slide on what Protex has picked up, and having that ingrained in how you in your current workflows is really, really important. So taking the time to work with the technology providers to stop and say, well, how are we doing this? How should we work on this on a daily basis? Is an important aspect when you're bringing in any type of technology like this.
Good stuff. Pete, I was going to ask you from a safety perspective. Obviously, safety is all about protecting people, and the move in recent years, the trend has been, to make it about people and use people as not use people, but work with people to empower safety outcomes. And Arvin's put a question in the chat here about as AI becomes more integrated into safety systems, how can we maintain human oversight and accountability? So, from a sort of safety perspective, how do you weigh up those things where there are these potential positives, but there's also this potential question around, if this is all about human behavior, how's AI going to help us?
Yeah, no, it's a really great question, Christian. In fact, when we posted about this on LinkedIn, someone asked me that question and said, well, look, you're never going to get away from this human interaction. Safety is all about human interaction. But, I am a safety professional. I'm not a tech guy. I've sort of come into this, but I look at how much time I spend behind a computer, and I'm sure other safety professionals will resonate with this, how much time I now spend behind a computer analyzing information or accident statistics or data or writing risk assessments or researching things or producing policies, procedures, things like that, even emails. It's an awful lot of time that I currently spend on this stuff. That means that I don't get to spend time out on site and with people face to face. So, for me, that's really simple. I don't think AI is going to replace that human interaction, but I think it will free up time that I spend doing other things and make that human interaction better. Not only give me more time, but allow me to focus on the things that are really important.
Yeah, I think that's a great ambition, isn't it? And a great use to leverage the technology, because AI can do a lot of great things, and it'll start doing even greater things as we go along. But I feel like it's never going to fully replace the human element. So therefore, if we can within the safety world start to leverage this technology, AI and other technologies, to enable us to spend more time doing those things where we're adding the most value, I think that's where we can really, really benefit from it. Dan, would you give us a quick overview of some of the kind of current use cases that you're seeing in the safety world? So obviously explain what you guys do, but then perhaps some of the other products that you've seen out in the marketplace. And then Pete, I'll ask you the same question to come in on anything you've become aware of as well.
Sure. Yeah, I'll kick off. So maybe a bit of background on what we do at Protex AI. So we link in with existing CCTV systems to identify danger before people get hurt. So what Protex does is it looks at the behavior trends that leads to accidents, so that you can stop the behaviors from happening rather than waiting for accidents to occur. So if you know Bird's triangle or Heinrich's triangle, we're trying to widen that base at the bottom so you can make decisions way down there rather than having to wait until somebody it can be fatally hurt or in general gets hurt. So some use cases are things like forklift. Forklifts are a huge thing for us. It's so hard to spot things like near misses. I think near misses are probably the hardest thing to spot across sites, because you got to be there, right place, right time, right people, which is really, really difficult, and it happens in a split second. The problem with those is if those things like near misses or ergonomic issues are another big thing. If those things aren't spotted, they just keep happening and keep happening and keep happening until they're not misses anymore and someone gets really hurt. So we work a lot on kind of behavior stuff, on forklift behaviors, things like ergonomics, things like PPE detection, exclusion zones, walkway misuse, all the type of stuff. And we're really good at it. So we've been, on average, we get a risk reduction between 74 and 80% on site, which we're really happy about. And at the same time, I think people have to be aware of that AI isn't magic, where they think, so someone asked us one time if we could identify gas leaks with a camera. And I was like, well, you can't really, because you can't see that, right? We get other ones. We get asked one time if it was mobile phone usage across the site. And they said, well, if they walk behind a van, can you see that? And I was like, No, it doesn't have X-ray vision. So things like that. So you have to be really, really conscious of what we're saying, what it can do versus what you think it could do. But there's other technologies like gas sensors and things like that, or even things like sensors for different things like leaving doors open and stuff like that for heat. They're better in certain cases. But we do what we do really, really well. But there's certainly limitations on what you can do.
Yeah, I like that. And that's definitely true. You got to, with any technology, everything, well, even people, right? We all have our limitations, and technology is no different.
Yeah.
Pete, what other things have you come across?
Yeah, wow. Okay. Okay, so fire doors in the NHS. Previously, I worked in the NHS. Fire doors are a massive issue, huge cost to the taxpayer, absolutely huge. And there's a lot of different guidance, a lot of conflicting guidance that says you need to inspect fire doors based on how often they're used. So how do you know how often they're used? And this comes back to Dan's sensors. So if you have a little sensor on a door that costs really minimal cost compared to a check, it can go back to a system. You can see how often it's used, and then you can implement an accurate inspection frequency based on how often it's used. And that's, for me, that's one thing that I just think is amazing. There's a Safety AI, which is the Navitec WhatsApp integration. And I really love this system. So this is a closed large language model that's been trained, like I say, on the HSE, OSHA and EU OSHA guidance. And you can ask your WhatsApp a question. And sorry, I got a pop-up on my screen. Right. You can ask your AI a question in WhatsApp. It will give you an answer. But, you know, we've already talked about trust in these large language models. So what it does is it also cites your references. So it will reference all of the HSE documentation that's relevant, and you can click on the link. Now, previously, to find this, you'd have to pay licensing to a large platform. This system really, in comparison, is pennies. And one of my favorite things about this system is I can ask it a question in English, and it could spit out the answer in Polish or an Indian dialect or whatever language. So if I'm trying to communicate that and actually build that communication with the team on site, that's really helpful, and that's something that's really exciting to me. And then the other thing that I'm really excited about is the risk assessment and the application of AI to producing risk assessments, you know, because there's a very moral argument to what we do. And, you know, we know from the statistics that, you know, well, the HSE's workplace fatality statistics that you know, that they've not changed in the last 7 years. You know, they're still there. So, you know, we're all safety professionals. We're all doing a good moral job. We're all working hard. And I think we're like 97% of the way there. But if AI can help us get this little bit further, then I'm really excited, because one of the beauties of these systems is the more people you have using it, the more companies within your industry, it shares knowledge. Anonymously, it will share knowledge with all of the other organizations within your sort of sector, in your industry. And that way it will learn, and it will know a lot better than what we do as to which of the control measures is the one that actually makes the difference. Because sometimes when we write a risk assessment, we put this massive shopping list of control measures down as safety professionals. But sometimes it's quite hard to actually identify with sort of quantitative data which one of those is the one that's really, really important, which one of those is the one that makes a difference. Well, AI has this ability to analyze all of this information, way more than we can as professionals, way more than we could ever ingest. And it will have that ability to help make that workplace that extra 2, 3, 4, 5% safer.
Yeah, definitely. Someone's asked about could we use AI to create COSH and risk assessments? Probably about a year ago, or just over a year ago now. It wasn't long after ChatGPT came out. I thought it would be fun. Perhaps this tells you why I don't get invited to many parties. I thought it would be fun to see how much of a health and safety policy I could create using ChatGPT in 10 minutes. So I timed myself and I videoed the whole thing and recorded it. And I posted it on LinkedIn. I'll find the link and send it out. But, you know, within 10 minutes flat, I had created a pretty decent, you know, high level health and safety policy for, I think I called it Harris's Restaurant with 150 covers or something like that. You know, and that was just done with with no time or effort at all, and you got something that was the basis of, a policy. Obviously, you wouldn't then just rubber stamp that, sign it off, and start implementing that. And I think that's where we need to, as the guys have said, exercise some caution here about the context and what this technology can actually do and can't do. But just think of the time saving. Going back to your point, Pete, about we can use this to get more time in front of people. That's just one example where using ChatGPT you can achieve some good outcomes.
Yeah, and I mean, sorry to interrupt, Christian, but
no, go ahead.
yeah, there's I know Tim is on the call. There is a system called Intuity that, like I say, is not ChatGPT. It's not learnt from the newspapers or the press or whatever's on Google. They've trained the system only on the HSE or the relevant industry guidance that's relevant to that industry. So it's got a lot more credibility, a lot more reliability, and that's where we're moving very quickly.
And someone's just posted the link to Dave from Protex has posted the link to their website in the chat. So we've started talking a bit about this, but where would you say you see the potential advantages and I suppose the risks, the downside risks? Dan, what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's what people use it for. I think it's use the power for good instead of evil, right? So that's definitely something to take into consideration. I think when we always talk about managing by the collective, so massive part of what we do projects, and I think AI in general, is first off understanding that safety isn't an individualized behavior. And certainly, I don't believe it is. I don't think it's you solve one person doing things, you solve everything. If you're looking at someone here and solving that, there's probably a different person doing something elsewhere. So I think let's just take that into consideration on looking at it from a collective approach, not the individual. A big thing what we speak about is to see the forest, not the trees, where you're looking at it from a wider perspective. Because if you can solve that, and that's what we've done, we've helped them to solve that in order to solve the collective approach to it, and that's where you reduce risk. How you do that is a really interesting thing. So sensors are actually becoming a lot less popular. The reason for that is especially back sensors and lifting sensors. The reason for that is the privacy piece. So we're seeing that a lot across Europe where sensors are being used less because they're targeting individuals, and there's a lot of pushback on it. And they can only also be used for one specific use case. That's now being seen in the States. A lot of stuff like things like truck drivers looking at the safety stuff, that is active in the States quite a lot with companies like Samsara and Linux. However, in the EU and the UK, it's not really a flyer because it's literally watching someone's face and seeing what they're doing. So there's a lot of pushback there. So I think that's where the downfalls are, is when you start individualizing it. But things like sensors and specific cameras like that, where you're tracking individuals, is where people fall and get a lot of pushback.
Yeah, there was a question here about how do you kind of overcome the perception of the kind of big brother piece, which I think you kind of touched on there. And I guess we need to, generalize, not be too specific, take the individual out of it. It's not about the individual and their behavior. It's about the behavior of them within the group and what we can learn from that to try and mitigate risk.
Yeah, exactly. And there's some cool tech like even I saw Daniel McGuigan put in about the fleet safety stuff, which is what I mentioned there. But also they can be used for really cool stuff like route management for safety side of it. So that's where it's looking at it from a collective approach, because it's looking at all of the fleet at once rather than the individual drivers, which is really neat. So that's a really exciting way Daniel's using the technology in AI.
Yeah, I love that. Pete, we were chatting the other day on the phone about you've mentioned some of how you would see the main benefits. We were talking about some of the kind of downsides, and we both had a different way of saying roughly the same thing. Should we try and redo that point?
Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about. But yeah, we were talking. So for me, if I look at AI and how I can see its implementation in a company over the next few years, it's in relation to safety data. So how we store our safety compliance documentation, how we store and log our accidents, incidents, near misses. And in my experience, and I know I can't speak for all safety professionals, but I've worked in the industry a long time, our data is usually quite messy within health and safety. Accidents will be in a series of different Excel sheets that have all been exported from different software systems. And I think what's going to happen is I can see where we'll have an AI, let's say Copilot, because let me talk about Microsoft Copilot. We'll have AI, we'll have Microsoft Copilot, and we'll integrate that into our data. And the old adage is garbage in, garbage out. You're going to try and plug an AI Copilot or AI assistant into what is effectively junk data, and it's going to try and give you answers. And like one of the things that we talked about was, say, if you take accident, an accident form for most companies, and I've seen it where it's like, why do we record these 30 different points on an accident form? We don't have to, unless it's RIDDOR or someone's been injured. But we record these 30 points, and I've seen it before where someone's recording humidity levels, and you circle the box as to what the humidity was, and it's like, that's fine, but this was a retailer, like a tie rack. It's irrelevant. It's not relevant data. But because they downloaded the accident report off of the internet and it was on there, it's data that they've always collected. Well, when we plug that in, AI is going to look and go, well, you need to adjust the humidity levels, and you're going to go, that's rubbish. This is a ridiculous point that you're coming up with, and it's not. It's just the fact that we fed it garbage. So, I think in preparing for AI, we need to look at what data we're collecting and how we're collecting it and try and simplify it.
Yeah, that is what I was talking about.
Cool.
The
Otherwise, I went off on a massive tangent.
No, that's all good. I'll tell you what, Naomi, do you want to come in on this point, and then I'll give a bit more thoughts on what Pete was just saying.
Hey, Christian, can you hear me? Just making sure you can.
Yeah.
Yes, it does. So, I was a flip. So I literally have gone from, in talking about all this AI stuff, because watching the questions come through as well, going, well, everyone's concerned about, your privacy and all that kind of thing. I was a flip. So I went from literally AI is out together, we're big brother, like conspiracies to the max, like you name it, I thought it. And then now I've come in as AI is actually here as we've been discussing, as a tool. It's a tool. It's here to help us. It's not here to hinder, but it's already in. It's already being used. It's already here. It's like we may as well grab it and use it to its full potential. But in saying that, in answering all those privacy and all that kind of stuff, like at the end of the day, the amount of stuff that we put on just Facebook alone or is attached to our Google account, our data is already out there at the end of the day. If you're conspiracy minded and you think, well, what if they want to use your data, they've got you, hands down, no questions asked. Like my key card is on my phone, for example. If they wanted my numbers, they could get it, and that's all it is. So I think you really need to create the space within your business or the organization you're working in as a professional on how you're presenting and how you're selling AI to your organization. If you're excited about it and you're presenting it as a tool and saying, this can help us, then yeah, no, fantastic. It will help you. But if you're not, sorry, my gate alarm's going off. I think I've got rabbit. But if you're continually selling it and you're hesitant about it, and you're the one that's turning around going, yeah, I'm not sure. Well, you're not going to paint it in the best of light to the people that you're trying to roll it out with, if that makes sense. So it's really great we're doing these sessions so then we can gain more information. But I think if for anyone who's unsure, even after this session, just go and do as much research as you can, find as much research as you can, and don't be worried about the data that you're plugging into these things. At the end of the day, like your organization and their IT experts make the decision on whether a tool or an application is good and usable within your business from security and things that you have. So that's their responsibility. At the end of the day, our responsibility is to actually trust that those systems are in place and have some faith that they're actually there to work and help us move forward with this new tool that we've got.
Yeah, I like that. Go on, Dan.
Yeah, I was just going to say, just echoing Naomi's point there. I think a big thing is that data approach. You know, because if you think about it now, like how many data points are you actually making decisions off in your organization? Like genuinely, if everyone can think about their last safety decision, how many data points was it off? Was it off maybe 3, 4, maybe even 10? You know, that's a very small data pool to base a whole organization or a whole site or whatever it may be decisions off. And if we have shit data, call a spade on it. If we have shit or poor data, your decisions are going to be really poor. And that's a really, really important aspect to it. So I think that's a really, really good point you're making there, Naomi, of getting as much data as possible to make the right decisions. And that's what we're seeing as well is if you lock yourself into saying, well, we've seen people, for example, we had a client, one name it is, but they had 2 sites. It's site A and site B. Site A had a bunch of reports, bunch of safety reports. Site B didn't have that many, so they thought site A was way more dangerous because it had way more safety issues and reported to their teams. When they brought in our system, they found it was the actual opposite. And the reason for that was that the safety culture in the second site was just really, really poor, that people just didn't report. But that didn't necessarily mean that it was a safer site. But in fact, it wasn't. And that's because they didn't have the right data to make the decisions. So they pumped all their resources into site A to try to fix that. And then it ended up not, because they actually had a really, really good safety culture in there, but the other side just didn't. So that's what the knuckle of the problem is. But the reason that they made those decisions and put all that money behind those resources was because they didn't have the right data. And I think that's a really important way to be looking at it, echoing kind of what Naomi said.
Yeah, I'd agree fully with both of your points, and actually, it's going to go into what I was going to say anyway. Interestingly, and as Naomi was speaking about, the fact that we've got to accept that all this data is already out there about us, the expression that came to mind was that ship has sailed, and that's going to make Pete laugh, because the analogy I was going to give when he and I were talking, the analogy I gave to him about how I see AI is that it's like an accelerator or an accelerant, and I said, look, if you're Christopher Columbus and you're trying to trying to go out exploring and find India, if you had a modern ship versus the ship you had back then, you'd get there much faster. But if you still don't know which direction you're going to get to America in less time, and you're still not going to actually get to where you want to be going. And so I do think that we need to think about the inputs to this. So if we accelerate poor safety practices, if we accelerate analysis of poor data, as you just said, Dan and Naomi, then it's not going to be helpful to us. It's actually going to make things worse. So we do have to, with any kind of technology, take that step back and just question, are we doing things right in the first place? Have we got these foundations correct? Because otherwise we're going to be building this massive tower on quicksand, and that's not going to be anybody's benefit. So that, to me, is one of the big risks that I would see. By the way, guys, anybody else wants to come and join in the chat, just go into reactions, raise your hand like Naomi did, and come and have a chat to us. So with all of that context then, how should a safety professional, somebody listening to this, watching this, joining us on the call, take their first steps? What would you say are the practical things that people should do to start kind of going on that journey? Pete, I'll come to you first on this one.
Yeah, cool. I mean, it's difficult, and I can understand the nervousness around it. I'm a safety professional. I've done the IOSH, the NEBOSH journey, and at no point throughout any of that does it talk about digital management of documentation. And it was only under the Building Safety Act and the requirements under the Golden Thread and this requirement to digitally manage documentation. And I went to the FPA and I said, at an event, I said, have you guys done any training on this? Because I've done loads of your courses and I still don't understand digital management of documentation. I kind of realized this thing was coming, and I want to I want to be relevant in the industry. I've got another 15 to 20 years left in this industry, and I want to make sure I keep up with it. So for me, it was a must do. And I can have the fear and the trepidation about AI, but it's not going to help me if it comes anyway. It's not going to help me to be a better safety professional. So to me, I was just like, I need to get on board with this. So the first thing I did, honestly, I got on YouTube and I started watching some videos on it, but it's okay, but some of them are fairly complicated and it's not very clear. But I think there are some great safety professionals out there that are starting to put information out there in our language. And I have set up my safety tech podcast. By all means, please listen to it. But at the same time, I'm not twisting your arm.
I thought that would be the first thing you'd say.
Oh mate, I didn't want to be cheeky, but it's not a selling platform. But I have set up this podcast, and my rationale was that I wanted to have conversations with people like Dan, say for instance, and have a conversation from the point of view of the safety professional and try and be that conduit between tech and the safety professional. So I'm not, pretending that I'm some tech expert here. I'm a safety person with a keen interest in it, and I'm trying to find this middle ground. But I'm not the only one. Peter Jenkins from Simple Foundry, he's great, and you had him on your presentation last time. Really practical as to how we can use tech, how we can use simple things like Microsoft Teams, SharePoint to make a safety system more efficient and quite cheap. And then later on, we can integrate Copilot into that system, and you've now got an AI platform without even really getting too technical about it. So, I think it's a complicated topic, but I think there are safety professionals who are starting to make that transition into helping educate other safety professionals. We're doing our best.
Yeah. And are there any particular we spoke at the start about the fact that AI is quite a broad church. Are there any particular areas that you feel are most accessible? So if somebody was thinking like, I want to dip my toe in the water here, which sort of area do you think they would maybe be best at starting off at?
Wow, great question. I would say honestly, the Microsoft tools are really cool. Genuinely, the Microsoft tools are really cool. Teams, that's really awesome to start building files on and start building things. And then you can get Copilot really quite cheaply, if you want to play with it at home. And Peter Jenkins, like I say, has got some great advice on this. I'm loving the app that Prakash Sangani's done. I love that safety AI app from Navitech. You can find it all over LinkedIn, and it goes on to WhatsApp. Sorry, actually, you log on and you literally message it like a WhatsApp friend. And it's like a closed language model, like a closed chat GPT. I've got to give that a shout out because I think that's really brilliant. And I think it's free to trial as well. So that's really great.
That's one of my favorite words, free.
Yeah.
Gotta love that. Debbie, you've got your hand up. Do you want to unmute, and have you got a question for us or a comment?
Yeah, I mean, I'm coming at it from an asbestos perspective, obviously. My biggest challenge is I understand the AI, I love computers, I love it all being easy to use. The difficulty I've found is that if we do, say, a management survey on a building and the asbestos register is put within IT, so everyone can go onto a platform and they can view the live register, that part of it's brilliant, that's fine. But then the company or whoever owns the building decides that the contractor is going to do some work and a pre-refurb survey needs doing because it's more invasive. The contractor, because the company that owns the building, in my opinion, is naive, they get the contractor to do the survey. That information stays in the pack with the contractor, is very rarely then fed back to the client that owns the building. So the register's then not updated. That's fine if the asbestos that's found is deemed unnecessary and they choose to remove it. At least it's gone. I've not got to worry about a health issue. But the problem is if they decided to do a refurb or simplify it of a bathroom and they pull out the toilet system that's got asbestos in it, but they can't get to the asbestos insulation board in the corner. So that's left there. The technicality seems to be, or the downfall is then the administrator within the owner of the building doesn't get the data, doesn't put it on the register. So it's incomplete. So you're probably back to whatever you feed it is all it can feed you back. But the disconnect between the administrator, because in my opinion, if asbestos is managed properly, a decent administrator should be able to administrate it and just, escalate it if a box goes red. They get terrified of it because it's asbestos and don't update. But there's a disconnect because the company that does the building work doesn't tell them, so they don't upload it and so on. So I don't know how to bridge that gap because they want to see an Excel sheet potentially. So is there a platform out there that simplifies it for the administrator is probably kind of where I was going with that.
Any thoughts on that, Pete? That sounds like one probably perhaps a bit more for you than Dan.
Yeah, do you know this? Well, this is a huge challenge, and it's not this. I'm not going to be able to answer the question about asbestos. Sorry, Debbie, but it's a really great point. Is
I can answer the questions about asbestos. Don't worry.
But how do we integrate all these systems, and how do we get all these systems to work together? And this is certainly what we've had in fire safety with Golden Thread: is how we take all of this different bits of safety data all the way through a building life cycle and get them all into almost like one place that everyone can access them without challenges around licensing, and then people can amend them easily and update them, but there's still this version control and control over the accuracy of the document itself. But then also that there's elements of it that's live and people can share them. And I think this is going to be a big challenge within the industry. Is we're going to have various different safety software systems. Say you take an organization, you're going to have 3 or 4. How you're going to get them to sort of integrate with each other and link to each other or API, and work together. And that is a challenge. But I think it's not a challenge that we necessarily need to tackle as safety professionals. I think it's a challenge that the tech side, on the industry side, needs to look at.
Yeah. Did that help? Hopefully that helped, Debbie. And thanks for
it does
good
help.
Point.
Thank you. Yeah, as I say, it is the tech side that needs to sort it out, but they don't understand what is needed sometimes. It's definitely the Venetian Martian thing. We speak one language and they speak another.
You see that a lot so there's this whole economy called insurtech, and there's these clever technology people who are trying to create software and technology systems for use in the insurance market. And you stand there as an impartial person that knows a bit about insurance, and you look at some of the stuff they've created, and it's fantastic from a tech perspective, but is it actually solving the problem of the insurance market? And I think that is the big challenge, isn't it, with all of this stuff, is how to marry up the advances in technology, whether it's AI or anything else, with is it actually really going to solve a problem, or is it just something that is kind of cool and interesting and exciting, but I'm not going to rely on it, and therefore what value does it bring?
Yeah, that seems to be my hardest part when I'm reviewing software, tech, anything like that. So the system we use is bespoke. I designed it. I got someone to program it. I like to think I have a basic understanding. But I mean, silly things like I would say a phrase to them. I think the best things for a building, and talking to an architect, they'd drawn up a plan that had a void written on it. And I'm looking at it going, why is there a void in the middle of the stairs? In their world, it was a beautiful pendant light. In my world, it was where you shove pipework. So I think that's where the safety element of us as advisors, we've got a responsibility to make sure it is fit for purpose, because they go running off down a rabbit hole, program something that's no good to man nor beast. And it is overcomplicated. My asbestos management plans, I did them at the beginning of COVID because I overcomplicated them and then pared them back. And HSE loved them, and they are just literally an Excel sheet. And I understand needing to get the data into something that everyone can view from a safety element. There's a brilliant thing for UK NAR, for UK national registers, and having QR codes on the building. I'm still looking at it thinking, well, how does that contractor's information get into that building's register? And if we don't, as safety professionals, make the IT aware that that is a problem, there's always going to be this disconnect. And I genuinely don't know how to change it, other than making the administrator think they're filling in an Excel form, because that's what it looks like, but it's actually going off to a system somewhere. in a better way. But yeah, I don't know how to fix that one, and I'm sure there's other people out there that are better than me and will do.
Good stuff. Well, if anybody's got any thoughts for Debbie on that, then feel free to reach out to her. Michael, you've got your hand up. Do you want to unmute?
Yeah. No, I was just going to sort of touch on Debbie's point there, and these maybe going to a bit of a segue on this, but I know in like the utility space, a lot of sort of areas, they'll have like what we call like safe digs or things like that. So basically, different providers and different surveyors will all collate all that information to one centralized, accessible place that people can get information from. And I think it's a really good point you raise there, because I mean, I've worked in the social housing sector, and I've worked in sort of the property maintenance sector, and some of the biggest issues we'd have is getting relevant and up-to-date asbestos information. And I think it'd probably be a really good shout if there was a similar initiative for sort of commercial buildings or properties that are managed commercially, to have that centralized database that people could draw from, because then it wouldn't matter who did the survey, because it'd all feed to that one location. Obviously, that's a sort of a big sort of policy picture I'm painting there, but it just sort of made me think that, they can do it for utilities. Surely it wouldn't be that difficult to sort of bring a similar initiative together for something like asbestos within buildings.
Yeah, no, definitely good thoughts there. Thanks a lot, Michael. Dan, just going back to what I was chatting to Pete about a second ago, where would you advise somebody who has not really done much in this space now to get started? Can you think of any particular resources or places they could go, or where on the spectrum of AI do you think they'd be good to dip their toe in the water?
Yeah, I think there's twofold you can go by it. I think the best thing is just there's a lot of AI safety companies out there now, including us. Like, if anybody's interested in, especially in what we do, we're very happy to just chat. It doesn't have to be anything about, hey, do you want it in your site or anything like that. We can just give a lot of info on it. Leverage off off the technology providers. This isn't, even like this time, I've been at every conference I go to now, there's more and more AI companies coming up. Get onto them. That's your first port of call. You can look at, I think I do agree with with Pete's point on like with Microsoft Copilot and things like that. They're good, but there are technologies out there very specific for safety, like ourselves, to make sure to leverage off that. That's why I say one protocol. The other thing you can do as well is look internally. Like, what are your issues? What are your biggest issues on the site and in your day-to-day lives? And then go on and just literally put in that and put in AI. And I promise you'll get results back on Google that there'll be companies that are trying to solve that. A lot of really innovative companies trying to solve that too. So make sure that you're leveraging off that. So I'd say, yeah, leverage off the existing technology systems that are there by just going onto Google and put in AI safety or AI reports or whatever it may be, and you'll get really good results back.
Yeah, good pragmatic advice there. We had a question, Dan, which I'd love your input on, which was actually from Michael, which was, do you see any issues arising in terms of liability from closed language models designed to support risk assessment? Would this essentially make the tech provider vicariously liable or technically a consultant? And I guess you could apply that same question to you, which is what I think is interesting to ask. If you're putting in your cameras and triggering things to happen, and is there any risk of, or is that a question you've been thinking about, that kind of liability point?
Yeah, we've come across liability stuff a lot. Like, we're never liable for something because we're essentially a tool that people use to get that information. I think safety is a bit different in that if you're looking at it, going back to that data question or data line of thinking, we're not trying to stop accidents as they occur. So it's not saying that it's forklift stop's going to hit someone and they get hit and there's a big problem and the system didn't spot it. Behavior isn't something that happens in the moment. It's usually repeated on those leading indicators. So I would say yes, if you're trying to stop things like as they occur, and you're liable for not spotting those things. But that's not what we do. We try to stop accidents months before they occur. Where maybe if something slips through the cracks, that's not as bad of a thing. False, or what is it? True negatives or true positives, whatever it may be, whichever it is. If you don't spot everything, it's not a terrible thing, but you can certainly expand that data pool. So if you're trying to stop accidents as they occur, there's liability. But if you're looking at it from the data approach, from the month to month prior to that, we're trying to stop the leading indicators. Not so much. There was another interesting question there just to bring up, was the integrations piece.
Yeah, go on. Yeah.
Yeah, I just thought that was a couple of people have said it. I thought that was a really good way of thinking about it, and that goes back to my previous point of putting into your current workflows is really important. So it has to integrate the stuff. So look at your APIs, or always ask your technology providers what type of APIs they have in order to do that. I think a couple of people have said is there current systems that do that. There are current systems like the Benchmarks of the world, or Intellex, Safety Culture. All those kind of big companies do have APIs available. Just ask them if they have it with certain companies. So we have, for example, we integrate with pretty much everybody on the market at the moment in relation to having an API with them. But that's an important way to look at it. So I'm glad people are thinking about that already, of bringing it into their current workflows.
Yeah, really important to think about that. And I suppose the other thing is to, with that in mind, is to just to consider being streamlined as well, because it's very easy. Think about it on a personal level. How easy is it to subscribe to Sky and to Netflix and to Disney and to this and to that, and you end up spending loads of money for doing things that are not exactly the same, but they're kind of similar. And I suppose one of the big kind of existential challenges of the future will be, is there a way to kind of achieve these integrations in a kind of partnership-based approach where everyone isn't looking to get their £100 a month or whatever it might be, but instead, could we bundle things together and do something for £100 a month with all of that functionality? So that'll be an interesting question coming up in the years to come. Before we finish off, and happy to take a few more questions, I just wanted to mention the next Safety Roundtable session, which is 2 weeks today, Wednesday, the 6th of March. And I'm going to be joined by James McPherson of RiskFluent, and we're going to be talking through his work, putting together a framework for operational risk success, which I think is really interesting and will be a great discussion. You might know James from his Rebranding Safety YouTube channel and or podcast. Funnily enough, I was the first ever guest on his podcast back in the day. So there we go. So yeah, that's in a couple of weeks. But in terms of today, I can see a few people are having to head off anyway because we're coming up on time. But I think it's been a really valuable discussion. Hopefully what you've come away with is a bit more context. So we've kind of explained that, AI isn't just one thing. There's a broad spectrum of use cases. We've covered some of the current use cases in safety, how you should think about it philosophically, some of the pros, some of the cons, and hopefully giving you some practical steps to get moving on your AI journey. So hopefully you've got a lot from this. We've tried to pack in as much as we can. Thanks very much to Dan. Thanks very much to Pete for joining. Do check out Dan on LinkedIn and his website. Do the same with Pete and have a listen into his podcast. And I suspect Dan will be on the podcast at some point soon as well. So if you've enjoyed hearing from the two of them, they can both be having a natter between themselves sometime soon as well. So thanks very much for joining, guys. Hope you found it useful, and we look forward to seeing you again on another one soon. Cheers.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Amazing. Thanks, Christian.